Howdy, folks. If you read some older English translations of the Bible, like the Catholic Douay-Rheims that came out in 1609, or the Protestant King James that came out in 1611, you occasionally find some passages that seem a little mysterious. For example, in the Douay-Rheims, in Psalm 91, verse 11, we read, "But my horn shall be exalted like that of a unicorn." In the equivalent verse in the King James, it says, "But my horn thou shalt exalt, like the horn of an unicorn." In reading such passages, you might think, what on earth does that mean? Well, in these cases, the horn is being used as a symbol of strength or vigor. And so the psalmist is saying that, thanks to God, I'm going to be given a lot of strength and vigor. So praise God. Okay, fine, but what's this stuff about unicorns? I mean, does this mean that unicorns are supposed to be real? Well, if you look at the different passages in the King James and the Douay-Rheims that refer to unicorns, you never have one where a unicorn appears on camera. You never have a statement like, "And then Moses hopped on his unicorn and rode off." Instead, you have poetic expressions, figures of speech, like "as strong as a unicorn" or "like a unicorn." And so you could say, well, these are just figures of speech. We're not meant to take them literally, the same way that today I could say someone is as fierce as a dragon without implying that I think dragons are real. Before going that route, though, we should look a little closer at this. Now, today we think of unicorns as basically a horse with a long pointed horn in its forehead above its eyes. The Hebrew word in this passage is ra'em or ra'aim, depending on how it's spelled in different passages, and it's a somewhat obscure word, and that's not too surprising because the modern system for classifying animals scientifically that we use today didn't exist back then, and so if we're not talking about a common domesticated animal, it can sometimes be difficult for translators to know exactly which animal is being discussed. And there seems to have been some confusion about this in ancient times. The way that we got the word unicorn into this passage is from the Septuagint. The Septuagint was a translation of the Old Testament for Greek-speaking Jews, such as those in the community of Alexandria in Egypt. And in the Septuagint version of this passage, the word that it uses is Mano Karros. Now, that's a compound of the prefix mono, which means one, and the word keras, which means horn, so one horn. And if you say that in Latin, you get unicornus, from which we obviously get unicorn. Well, like I said, today we think of a unicorn as a horse with a horn. But is that how the ancients thought of it? Well, the greatest naturalist, perhaps, in the ancient world was a Roman named Pliny the Elder. And he died, somewhat mysteriously, during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79. But before he died, he wrote a multi-volume work called Natural History, in which, among other things, he described the animals that he was aware of, either having seen them directly or having heard reports of them, in different countries. And he mentions a Mano Karros as being native to India. He said that in India there is a very fierce animal called the Mano Karros, which has the head of the stag, the feet of the elephant, and the tail of the boar, while the rest of the body is like that of the horse. It makes a deep, lowing noise and has a single black horn which projects from the middle of its forehead 2 cubits in length. This animal, it is said, cannot be taken alive. So, to review the essential elements of the physical description that he gives for a Mano Karros, Pliny said that it has the head of a stag, the feet of an elephant, the tail of a boar, the body like that of a horse, and a single horn from the middle of its forehead. Recently, I was looking at a picture drawn by an artist. It was an artist's conception of what Pliny said about the Mano Karros, and indeed, it had all these features. It had a stag-like head, the feet of an elephant, the tail of a boar, the body of a horse, and a long single horn in the middle of its forehead. It was a very nice picture, but as an artist's conception, it's something that might not represent precisely what Pliny's animal was. In particular, there could be room for variability in the proportions, which can make a difference. And in this case, they do, because there is actually an animal in India that fits Pliny's description quite well. You leave a little room for variation and, some flexibility, but it's really a close fit. Now, we need to talk for just a second about foreheads. As human beings, we have front-mounted eyes and a nose that begins at our eye level. So our forehead is above our eyes and our nose. Some animals, though, like horses and stags, have side-mounted eyes, and they have their nose down at the bottom of their face. And so in the middle of their face, they have a long stretch that could be called a forehead. And that's where this animal's horn is. It has a single horn in the middle of its forehead, just above its nose. And because this horn is just above its nose, it's not only called a Mano Karros, a one horn in Greek, it's also called a Rhinoceros, or as we would say in English, a rhinoceros. And if you look at a picture of an Indian rhinoceros, you can see how well it fits Pliny's description. It does have a head kind of like that of a stag, and feet like that of an elephant, and a tail like that of a boar, and a body like that of a horse, and a single horn in the middle of its forehead, just above its nose, which is why you can not only call it a one horn, but a nose horn. That's what rhinoceros means. So the Indian rhinoceros may actually be the basis of the European legends that we're familiar with of unicorns. It's also interesting to note that in the Douay-Rheims version, although not the King James, it actually translates the word referring to this animal as rhinoceros in some cases. In the passages in the Psalms that refer to this animal, it uses the term unicorn, but elsewhere it uses the term rhinoceros. And this displays some awareness of the fact that the Mano Karros may indeed refer not simply to what we think of as a unicorn, but actually to a rhinoceros. Is that then what the animal actually is that the Hebrew author was referring to? Well, could be, but modern biblical scholars have generally thought that it refers to a different animal. If you look in a modern Bible translation, like the Revised Standard Version Catholic edition, you'll see this passage translated this way: "But thou hast exalted my horn like that of the wild ox." Or if you look at the New American Bible Revised edition, it will say, "You have given me the strength of a wild ox." So that's the common opinion among Bible scholars today, that the creature in question, the Ra'em or Ra'em, is a wild ox of some kind, because there are different species of wild ox, and so there's still some variability about what species might be intended. For example, one species that is sometimes talked about as a possible contender for the Ra'em is the Arabian oryx. And if the Arabian oryx is what the biblical authors have in mind, it's easy to see how they could be talking about my horn is exalted like that of an oryx, because Arabian oryxes have these huge, tall horns. They're really exalted, and so would make a very apt metaphor for God endowing one with great strength. And so between oryxes and other forms of wild oxen and rhinoceroses, it seems that there are a number of possible candidates for what this creature could be, besides what we think of as a unicorn.